company.
The company.
The company.
What's
There's
happening?
one up here too. There's a turret up here.
Can we break them?
Well,
There's a turret up here as well.
Is it really?
we'll need to go in and go to the left. Does anyone have a radio?
I don't.
Oh, fuck. Nope.
There we go.
I don't like this.
I got the steam.
I'm gonna take the radio if we're gonna do that.
Can you destroy them?
Oh, bro. Another one.
Go to the door!
Did you see where it was?
God bless America.
I see it.
Did you die?
Is this Wes I'm holding?
Yeah, there were just turrets upon turrets.
I'm just gonna drop.
Why is
That
it
is
right
that is
there?
a spawn. Okay, Alex. Okay, yeah, we'll just run past this. Isaac, I don't think Isaac could jump.
Yeah, there's 2 turrets in there.
Jesus Christ.
I guess I thought I'd just hop
There's a
on
big
right
bolt.
into it, you know?
Are they even sure that they get back in one piece?
I have,
The turret
I have 2
sniped me down the
flashlights. I guess I can
hallway.
drop one.
Yeah, get rid of one.
I also have a
I
shovel.
was so worried about that turret, I just completely
Fuck.
messed up my jump.
No, let's see if there's only a round. Oh, there's 2 turrets.
Not that way.
Indeed.
There's Who needs monsters when you have infinite turrets? That's a locked door.
Alex is freaking destroying in the main thing right now.
Fuck, another bottle.
There's no way they.
Oh, there's one down there. Careful.
Oh my freaking gosh!
Are you fucking kidding me?
There's so
God
many.
damn it.
Oh, there's a freaking got a thumper going up the stairs on that other one. Or is that dog? I can't tell.
Did you guys see the turret that was sitting on the rebar to jump
Yeah,
across?
then, wouldn't it? That dog.
Shit, dude.
This is
There's a
crap.
jack in the box in here.
They
And a
get to
fuck
choose
ton of-
between the dogs and the
Why is it so bad?
I don't know.
Did everybody die? He was beaming up at literally everyone.
I thought I heard Felix in
Dead
here.
bodies
but-
warping.
Okay, well maybe we should try to go past this guy. Yeah,
But
it's
either.
at the dog outside. It's only 1 p.m.
I do. Could you hit the stairs?
Oh no.
What was that?
It was a
That was the
jester.
jester.
What? There is just one thing I need. I don't care about them presents underneath the Christmas tree.